short names will be quick. Okay, thank you. Well, I wanted to find a way to look at economics and aesthetics and poetics at the same time. So the topic of the book is the intersection of economics and poetics, the material and the poetic economy. There is a certain tradition of interpretation that mostly originated with Marxist theory. And one of the main theorists who worked on this was Mark Schell. So at the end of the 70s and 80s, he wrote a couple of books, The Economy of Literature and Money, Language, and Thought, on this very topic. And he looked through history on different books that have engaged with that kind of intersection. What I wanted to do was to add my own angle, and I decided to kind of feed off of that tradition and work on two novels from the 1850s, two German novels, looking exactly at how economics and not necessarily just the topics, the content of economics, but also the structures, the representational structures actually speak in the work. I wanted to read to you the very start of my book. It's a quote from Jack Weatherford for one of his books. And this is about money, and this is why money is so interesting to a literary interpretation. Money does not occur in nature, and no version or analog of it exists among any other members of the animal kingdom. Money, like language, is uniquely human. Money constituted a new way of thinking and acting that changed the world immediately. Only now, after nearly 3,000 years, is the full power of money becoming apparent in human affairs, and it supplants or dominates many of the traditional social bonds based on family, tribe, community, and nation. So again, you can see that there is that materialist view that the environment we're in has an effect on literature, the outputs, the cultural outputs that we see in society. The novels that I chose are two so-called Bildungsromane. So they are educational novels from the 1850s, both in German, one Austrian and one German actually. And they have, usually the Bildungsromane or educational novels have a protagonist, a young man usually, who goes through a path and gets educated and kind of becomes assimilated with society. And these novels have certain variations of that theme. But the reason why I chose novels from this specific time period was that the merchant economy was really blooming at the time. And it became really kind of a big transition in society at that time. And also what was happening at the time was that money started becoming very abstract and fictional. Because this was a time when there was a transition from using a lot of coins and starting to use paper money. So my thesis is basically that as money becomes more fictional, more abstract, when you start using, you have a circulation that is more out of control and is not you don't have the exact equivalence of the substance and the symbol. You don't have any longer the gold, the value of the gold, and the symbol on the golden coin stating exactly that. You don't have that exact equivalent between the two. So instead, paper money, where the substance of the paper is really kind of valueless. And the same tendencies we see in literature at the time. This is the time of realism. I'm sure you're all aware of that. And at this time, people, or the authors, started to transition into a more modernist view of literature and writing. And we see these same tendencies that they start questioning the ability of actually representing reality realistically in their own literature, even though they still belong to that whole tendency of writing realist fiction. So that's kind of the thesis of my work. And the two novels, I don't want to take up too much time, the two novels themselves I compare. And the reason why I do this, as I told you before, when you look at the materialist approach, of course, the material economy does influence and does give kind of a substance to the cultural outputs. So what I wanted to see is this really true? Because here, in this case, I have two novels. We have Soll and Haben, Debit and Credit, and we have Nachsommer, which is Indian Summer. Indian Summer is part of that high tradition, canonized literature. It's very aestheticized in its whole narrative. Adalbert Stifter is one of the major authors of German literary tradition. On the other hand, you have then Gustav Freytag in Soll and Haben, which is a real, what they call Kaufmannsroman. It's a merchant's novel. So even the protagonist of this educational novel is actually not of high society necessarily, but he's being trained in actually executing transactions in the bourgeois merchant economy. So that novel explicitly talks about the economy. That is the theme, the content, the topics of that novel. Whereas the other one is very far from it. It doesn't have anything to do, it's actually an autarky, so it's set in a far off, it doesn't have anything to do with a real economy. So they're very different in their approaches. They're still realist novels. Gustav Freytag, the one that deals specifically with the economy, is actually not necessarily part of the canonized high literature. It was a very common and well-read novel at the time, but not really highly regarded or highly accepted in a sense. So that was an interesting thing to see how those two scenarios compare. If you can still use this approach of looking at the economic patterns with both novels. And in order to investigate this, and I should probably conclude with that, I came up with an approach that I call economo-poetics. And I look at that in a couple of different facets. So first of all, what I look at in a novel is the content of the economy. So I look at the behaviors, for example, of collecting, of the theme of fair value, of all the exchanges taking place in the economy. So that's one of the facets, that's number one. And then the other one is that I look at how the exchanges in literature, so how the money facilitates commodity exchange, right? And the written word facilitates the exchange between reality and text. So I look at those patterns and compare, and that's the kind of the second facet of economo-poetics. Then the third one is really more as a literary strategy. So I look at authors who actually employ economic poetics or an economic poetic strategy in the literature. They actually make themes, and they draw conclusions, and they employ these intersections in the literature, in the narrative itself. So I looked at those three different levels, comparing the two novels. So it's really, again, like I said, it's maybe not of general interest. It's really an exploration of those two specific novels using a very specific theory that I actually came up with myself based on a long tradition with a very few exquisite scholars who have done that. And basically my conclusion is, and I don't have to read the book to get to all the details, but that both of the novels you can interpret using this theory for both of the novels. The one that explicitly talks about the economy and the one that completely avoids it. Because all the structures, the intersections, the representational exchanges are still there. Even though the narrative itself, the topics, the themes, don't necessarily relate directly to the economy and to business interactions and transactions. So, yeah, I think that's kind of the synopsis. I hope it was somewhat comprehensible. And I'd be happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.